Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. Today is Thursday, June 20th, and with the 2023-24 NBA season finally coming to a wrap, we are going to already, as we tend to do, look ahead into the future at next year and contemplate whether or not there are any teams that are going to be able to dethrone the Boston Celtics. Feels like this is the second straight year of having a champion that feels like they are, I wouldn't quite say untouchable, but from the Denver Nuggets in 2023 and the Celtics this year, two extremely strong teams, and yet we saw what happened this year. It's not easy to consistently go on these deep postseason runs. So as, unstoppable as the Celtics felt during this postseason, we are going to contemplate what teams could potentially give them a run for their money in the upcoming season. So we're going to be diving into that. And while talking about the Celtics, we will also throw in some conversations about the Celtics and their offseason contract negotiations ahead, with Jayson Tatum and Derrick White both being eligible, for contract extensions. And sort of sticking with the NBA, we're going to talk about Klay Thompson, who has been getting himself into a little bit of social media drama and what it means for his future with the Golden State Warriors. And then finally, we are going to end off the show with a couple NFL segments. We are going to be diving into the coaches that have the most pressure surrounding them for the upcoming season, and additionally Aaron Rodgers, who is always a topic of conversation, talking about whether or not he should be trusted for next season as well. So we are going to dive into all of that. But before we do so, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our live viewers, be sure to use the comment section. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. You can leave a tip or donation with a comment that will pop up on screen. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. Like I mentioned, though, now that the 2023-24 season has come to a wrap, we have named an NBA champion in the Boston Celtics. We are already going to be looking ahead here to next season and whether or not there is going to be a viable competition to stop this. Everybody is talking about how the Celtics are currently built to be a dynasty, having all of their top 6-7 players under contract for years to come is absolutely, appealing and everything. But as we know, and especially in this most recent era where we've had 6 champions in 6 years in the NBA, parity is at an all-time high, and you can't just pencil in any one team into the NBA Finals. So we're going to go through here and sort of group these NBA contenders into tiers. Now, tier 1 is the Boston Celtics by themselves. They were absolutely dominant, of course, this year, winning 64 games in the regular season and then going 16-3, that is, in the postseason, and really did so in dominant fashion. Sort of led to partially a little bit of an underwhelming playoffs is the fact that Celtics, it never really felt like they were all that tested. There was never really a high level of concern that the Celtics weren't going to be able to win a series, let alone a game. And I think that for that reason, you have to give the Celtics their credit as the tier 1 team here on their own, but that doesn't mean there aren't going to be competitors moving forward. Now, I'll finish off here on the Celtics thoughts is the fact that we could see a better version of the Celtics next season, considering the fact that Kristaps Porzingis, he was unavailable for the majority of the postseason. He ultimately, as Joe Mazzulla put it, overrode the medical staff in terms of his availability for Game 5. But He's going to miss some time, you would imagine, to start the season, as he, I believe, is going to have to undergo surgery for that injury that he suffered in Game 2 of the finals. But ultimately, he will be back. What version of that is still very much to be determined. But if he is at least, 90% of what he was this past season, and that if he's actually available for the Celtics in the playoffs, that is automatically a massive factor that sort of swings things even further in their favor. And then the other factor is the fact that Jayson Tatum just was not efficient for the majority of this postseason. And I still defend him in terms of I don't think he was bad. I thought he did a lot of things outside of scoring that were massive for this Celtics team. And you would have to imagine that things can't get worse for Tatum from a scoring perspective. Now, maybe he ends up proving me wrong there, but I would have to imagine he at least takes some steps in the right direction in terms of scoring efficiency next year. So there is very much a possibility that this dominant Celtics run we saw could be replicated, but of course there are going to be teams that are stepping into that conversation as well, which is why when we go to tier 2, I have the Denver Nuggets, Minnesota Timberwolves, Milwaukee Bucks, and Dallas Mavericks. Now, the Nuggets and the Timberwolves, I feel like sort of speak for themselves. I think that they were the second and third best teams in the NBA this season. Ultimately, they sort of beat up on each other to some degree. Obviously, the Timberwolves knocking out the Denver Nuggets themselves, but Timberwolves also seemed like they were still just not necessarily fully ready. They had an incredible season, absolutely successful by any measurement, but at the same time, the number one concern with them is that the fact that even though they're not a super young team necessarily, I think that Anthony Edwards being the main star and him actually being the young player at 22 years old sort of changes the public perception of how young they actually are. But that being said, you are always going to, I feel like, in the NBA especially, have to have a little bit of these humbling moments, and that's what it was for the Timberwolves, where Anthony Edwards, he just ran out of steam by the end of the playoffs. Sort of similar, keep comparing what Edwards went through this year somewhat to what Jayson Tatum went through in 2022, when by the finals he was absolutely toast. And it's something that is a little bit of a natural progression for a lot of these young stars. And I don't overreact to that Western Conference Finals loss much at all. There was clearly a little bit of a matchup issue in terms of them being such a post-centric defense and going up against the Dallas Mavericks offense, which was phenomenal at spreading out defenses and sort of picking on Rudy Gobert in that pick and roll. Obviously, you have to feel like to some degree the Timberwolves were watching that final series and just thinking to themselves, what was the reason we weren't necessarily attacking Luka Doncic more through the first halves of these games? And obviously spacing in comparison to what they had in the Celtics is different. But I think that there are a lot of things that they are going to make adjustments with over this offseason, and they'll be more ready for the moment next year. But I did also include the Milwaukee Bucks and Dallas Mavericks on this tier. And honestly, I felt better about putting the Bucks on this tier than the Mavericks. Now, one of the main reasons is the fact that I do believe the Eastern Conference is far more open, and the Bucks are the number one challenger, I should say, to the Celtics in the Eastern Conference. I think that year 2 of Damian Lillard and Giannis and them developing that two-man game has the potential to be absolutely lethal. Now, Dame was a little bit inconsistent last year. We talked about this the other day on the show, that Doc Rivers openly said that Lillard was a little bit out of shape coming into the year because of the circumstances. He knew he was going to get traded, didn't want to get injured, along those lines. So I expect a little bit of a bounce back year from Dame here, who was still an all-star, but that felt like it was more of a reputation pick for him. And I thought that he struggled for a lot of the year. And ultimately, you end up losing Giannis down the stretch of the season. That is just automatically a recipe for disaster if you are the Bucks. But I think that they're going to have as good of a chance as anybody in the Eastern Conference to take down the Celtics. The Dallas Mavericks, I was a little bit hesitant to put them on this tier. I don't feel great about it necessarily. Now, they deserve a ton of respect. This and credit. This was a very successful season for them, but I think there's a good chance we see a little bit of a hangover next year. The hardships of making this run to the finals, going through that grueling schedule, and then to fall short is definitely tough to sort of bounce back from to some degree. I think they definitely need another piece, somebody who can be sort of a third option for them, can actually put the ball on the floor. It's just really hard to ask two players to single-handedly backpack your offense on the way to the finals. So I mentioned before that I think a wing is something they should be going after. Malik Monk is also a free agent this offseason, and he's somebody that I sneaky think could be a very good pick for the Mavericks, who he has experience. I think if he didn't get injured, he was going to win Sixth Man of the Year. So he can run the bench, and he can close for you as well. I really do like the fit of Malik Monk in Dallas if they have the money for it. But tier 3, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Indiana Pacers, and the New York Knicks. Now, this is kind of the grouping I saw, as it wouldn't surprise me if any of these teams made the finals, but I am more than likely going to bet against them because, again, experience is a massive thing in my eyes in the NBA playoffs, and we've seen even a run to the Eastern Conference Finals, like the Pacers saw, is not the same as finishing out a full finals run. And the Thunder, the Thunder had a great argument for they very easily could have beaten the Mavericks in the conference semifinals, and we would have seen what happened from there. The Knicks, if they were fully healthy, they probably beat Pacers in the Eastern Conference semifinals and try and challenge Boston. These are all teams that are very talented, but I just don't know if in a final series I'm ever going to be comfortable with picking them due to some inexperience. And again, that's something that is sort of built over time. The Thunder and the Pacers have really young cores. The Knicks, I wouldn't say they're youthful necessarily, and part of the Knicks issue too is we don't know exactly what they're going to look like. We just covered OG Anunoby and the contract dispute between him and the Knicks yesterday, so we don't know exactly what that is going to look like just yet. But ultimately, these are all really good teams. They should be able to play really good postseason series and have some runs, but I would be pretty surprised if they were to win the finals. Now, making the finals, different conversation. But tier 4, I have the Miami Heat and the Philadelphia 76ers. This is, you see the logo, there's talent, and at least for the Heat, there's culture, of course. But I think that both of these franchises have proving to do right now. The 76ers probably more so than Miami Heat, where Joel Embiid has been kind of one of the biggest losers, despite the fact that he played through an injury and he was pretty good for the most part. I know the stats would say he was great. I watched the fourth quarters. I don't necessarily feel like it was this incredible performance from Embiid, but just in the eyes of a lot of NBA fans, you start to look at all the list of different players who have made the conference finals before Embiid. Embiid, now 30 years old. He is facing a lot of scrutiny. So ultimately, I think that there needs to be some proving. They only have 3 or 4 players under contract right now, so there's a ton of unknowns still as to what they're going to look like next year. The Heat, they're kind of just in this tier because Jimmy Butler, they made the finals 2 years ago. Jimmy Butler, we know, is an all-NBA caliber player when he's actually playing. And you do trust Eric Spoelstra, who in my opinion is the best coach in the NBA right now. And it's just really hard to fully count them out. Now, outside of these teams, I left off the Warriors and the Lakers and the Pelicans maybe, even if you want to throw them in there. I probably have the Pelicans above those other 2 teams, being honest. Aside that, I would be, genuinely shocked if they went on to win finals. And not that you can fully count anybody out, but I just don't see, again, you're really talking about the Warriors and Lakers here. I don't see them being able to turn things around from where they're currently at. Can be playoff competitive teams, but a deep playoff run would absolutely surprise me. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section as we sort of wrap up this exercise. Again, it is all about beating the Boston Celtics, who have the majority of their rotational players already under contract for next year, and there are 2 of which who are eligible for contract extensions in Jayson, Tatum, and Derrick White. So we are going to be diving into what those contracts could potentially look like and whether or not they are no-brainers at this point. So that's what we're going to be diving into next. First, a break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
The greatest. Everybody on this shit, I go around and feel like he's the Vegas. I'm just every day fake. One day I have a what for face. Same it. Time is so vacant. I don't need shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when the fans hold out shoulder 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way. running it. The news if it's some motion shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign. A sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we look ahead to next season. Before we get there, the Boston Celtics, who are going to look to really establish themselves, in my eyes, as an all-time team. In order to do so, you have to back that up. And it's one of those things where I was actually listening to the Bill Simmons podcast earlier today, and he made the comparisons of this team to the 2015 Warriors, where the regular season numbers all year were pretty much undeniable, but then even when you come to the finals, the fact that Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love were both hurt for the Cavaliers, it was sort of this, yeah, but like they won, but things could have gone differently. And I feel like that is a lot of what we're seeing with this current Celtics team. The way that the Warriors were able to establish themselves as an all-time team outside of literally picking up an all-world player in Kevin Durant in free agency. But the bigger picture here is the fact that they were able to continue winning multiple championships and sort of solidifying that it's not just a fluke run, because again, injuries are such a massive part of the NBA playoffs on a year-to-year basis that you can try and put an asterisk on any championship in recent history. And that's just A, not a fun way to watch sports in my opinion, but B, just goes to show sort of the volatility of the NBA playoffs based off of, injuries and durability and such, and that a lot of time luck does come into play, as it does with literally every championship in every sport. But for the Celtics, they are going to need to win again, at least one just done. And they already have a number of their rotation players under contract for next season, but there are big decisions on how to make this offseason, and that is whether or not to extend Jayson Tatum and Derrick White. Now, for the most part, I think this is a very easy decision. Jayson Tatum is an absolute no-brainer to me. He has another year left on his contract for the 2024-25 season, but he has a player option in 25-26 that he's very likely going to decline. He might not even have to necessarily, because before he gets to that point in his contract, he's almost certainly going to have worked out a contract extension with the Boston Celtics. And as things currently stand, he is eligible of a 5-year deal worth $315 million. That would make him the highest paid player in NBA history, would have him surpassing his own teammate in Jaylen Brown, which does go to speak to the very expensive payroll. And if you were to have any concerns with the idea of trying to extend these players, it's the fact that you are going to be deep in the second apron next season in terms of the luxury tax, and there's going to be very little flexibility from there. Now, again, luckily they'll have their top 7-8 players already under contract. We'll see whether or not Al Horford decides to return or retire. Wyc Grousbeck spoke earlier this week and said that he expects Horford to be back, so again, we'll see on that, but for the 38-year-old, I'm sure it's going to take a little bit of time after this championship to fully process everything. But if he is physically able to go, I have a hard time imagining that he is going to cop out, because it's $10 million for him, and he is with a team in a city that absolutely adores him, and he has a golden opportunity to become a 2-time NBA champion. So I would probably expect him to be back at this point, but again, we'll see there. But as for Tatum, again, very much no-brainer in my eyes. 3 straight All-NBA first-team appearances. He's been on an All-NBA team and for the past 5 years, 5 straight All-Star appearances. You can go on with a number of some different postseason statistics as well that show that he has been putting up historical numbers so far to begin his career. Well, there's much to make on that part whatsoever. Now, Derrick White is where things get a little bit interesting, because Derrick White has been one of the development stories of the couple years. He was seen as, he was pretty much a hidden gem to some San Antonio's first team. The big trade piece forces were going through the field, and for Texas January, I think details right in front of me. But Derrick White ends up going for a lot less, and it was good for that first 2022 season. Now, the finals, he wasn't necessarily the same version of himself, and I would say in 23, he was almost buried a little bit to some degree by just the power dynamic of having Marcus Smart as sort of that third option that had built up all of this sort of equity in the Celtics organization, because he was the longest tenured Celtic. That as much as, especially in these days, Marcus Smart gave his absolute everything to the Celtics, and I definitely feel bad for him, because he deserves a ring just as much as any of the other Celtics on this roster in terms of what he's given to the Celtics organization over the past number of years. But at the end of the day, at the same time, Marcus Smart did kind of have to leave to open the door for Derrick White taking on a bigger role, and then obviously also the acquisition of Jrue Holiday. And it's interesting how that all played out, because, Marcus Smart, again, when the first Kristaps Porzingis trade went down with Malcolm Brogdon before he failed his physicals and the Clippers no longer wanted him, Marcus Smart seemed like he may have been a part of that Celtics core. Now, there are also rumors that it could have been a Tyus Jones for Marcus Smart trade. And again, I'm getting too far into this Marcus Smart tangent here. But the point being, things just sort of shook out in a way that were perfect for the Celtics, and they ended up getting Holiday and White, and that was the perfect backcourt for them. And, for White, he's not necessarily an alpha in terms of he's going to be a primary ball handler and he's going to will your team to win necessarily. But he had, another incredible season and played just him and Jrue Holiday both just impactful basketball that goes beyond the box score. From a box score perspective, White averaged 15.2 points per game, 5.2 assists per game, 4.2 rebounds per game. I don't have the block numbers up in front of me, but probably pretty impressive that's there. Made his second straight All-NBA, or All-Defensive team that is this past year. And I don't think Celtics would be in the same place without him. It seemed like he hit every big shot for them in the playoffs. Ultimately, when it comes down to this extension, he has $19.5 million on his deal for next season. He's eligible for a 4-year contract extension worth $125 million. Now, this is actually $10 million to the Jrue Holiday deal, and that's where it's interesting, because all of this list, I think there's no way they could extend Jrue Holiday and not Derrick White. It was a couple months ago, they gave Jrue Holiday the 4-year extension worth, I believe, $135 million, and Jrue and Derrick are very similar players in a lot of ways. A similar fit to the system, similar skill set, the defense first, but ability on offense to put the ball on the floor when needed and have some level of creation. And Derrick White is just kind of, to some degree, a younger version of Jrue Holiday, 4 years younger. It would be really weird to me to pay more to an older version of this player if you aren't going to hold on to Derrick White. So from that perspective, I think this is also a no-brainer move. Now, obviously, this is going to make the Celtics even more expensive. And again, they are not going to have very many options around the perimeter, around the margins per se, where they are going to have their players, the starting 5, which if they do sign Tatum and Derrick White to these contracts, all 5 of their starting players would have gotten new deals in the past 12 months. So Celtics clearly, and from their ownership perspective, a commitment to investing into this team is where they are currently at. And that is something that, again, you can hate the Celtics if you are not a Boston fan, but the way that the Celtics organization is deciding to run from a front office standpoint is something that every fan should want, because you want to see the owners that are willing to actually invest into their teams have success. So just want to sort of point that out. But ultimately, yeah, Celtics have a golden opportunity next year, especially in a weak Eastern Conference, that they are going to have another open path to the finals. If we sit here in June, right after the finals ended, I can't guarantee anything, but I do think that they have easily a path ahead of them that is, potentially leading them to dynastic tendencies. But again, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here just yet in the Legion. But we still have a full offseason to come from us, and as we dive further into that, we're going to have more resources to cover. And I do want to now talk about the drama that has been taking place around Klay Thompson, and he sort of simply put out on social media over the past week or so that have a lot of people curious about what his future looks like. So we're going to dive into all that. First, we have to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
GSMC Sports available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports. If it's a big world, just absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, LA, UFC, baseball, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows all over. It's just free every day. Your favorite cable, GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports on YouTube page for your new visions, like GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Big Deals Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube, absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're going to be diving in here to Klay Thompson and all of the rumors that are surrounding him, because within the past week or so, he's been sending maybe some signals on social media, which, again, every time I talk about this, I won't press this of saying it is so stupid the way that we sort of, overanalyze maybe some of these types of things on social media, but at the same time, Klay Thompson is doing a post of him celebrating from the 2022 NBA championship, and he's unfollowing the Warriors. He's doing that purposefully to send a message. So as much as, it's a dumb thing that we do, but it's something we do because it's what these athletes are purposefully trying to get us to talk about, meaning whatever. Now, maybe it's leverage, maybe not. It's interesting to see, talk about whether or not Klay actually has any leverage with the Warriors, considering he had overall a pretty disappointing season. This was the first year that we saw him coming off of the bench. I was surprised, actually, at the time when I found out that he actually never even came off of the bench when he was returning from his 2-year absence. He had always started for the Warriors, and at this past year, they had to have him come off of the bench because of the fact that he was really struggling to find his place, and some of these younger players, such as Brandon Bajemski, were just flat out outplaying him. So he now enters free agency truly for the first time in his career at 34 years old. And NBC Sports reported he is seeking an offer of at least 3 years, which is, I can understand the fact that he feels like he's 34 years old and he needs to sort of cash out one more time and that he can have some stability long term. I'm not sure how much annual money he's actually going to be able to get if he's looking for a contract of 3+ years. He could probably get a more sizable amount of money if he does sort of, 1-year deal somewhere where they almost just bring him in as like a hired arms or whatever they call it, and he can just play out the one season on a big contract, or probably seem that has a little bit of extra space, and he proved himself. Now, on that note as well, he did, that he isn't looking to be some sort of a player that takes massive contract to go to a one of the teams such as the Wizards or the Suns or those, and get out there. He would prefer to play for Denver. And obviously, in that case, the Warriors, I'm going to retract that as I say. He wants to be competitive. The Warriors do seem like an opportunity for him to be in the realm of being a playoff and such, and doing so with the organization that he's been for the entirety of his career, and just becoming a lifelong player with this organization that has been extremely successful. Now, the issue is that would likely require him to take a pay, and it seems like through the course of the regular season and some of the reports we're hearing, he was at least a little bit more willing to understand that he's not getting a $40-50 million contract along the way, but at the same time, I still think that he is going to envision himself as a player with more value than he maybe currently has. And by no means is Klay Thompson bad at this point, where he still shot. It was 39% from 3 this past year, and he's getting sort of clowned on a lot on social media for the fact that he went over 10 in the play-in tournament game, but still 39% from the three-point line on the season as a whole, which felt like it was a terrible year. And that terrible year, that is a career year for a lot of players, and I think there's a good chance he could bounce back. The fact that he still shot 93% from the free throw line, which actually led the NBA this year, means that it's not like shooting dribbles just disappeared from him. But I think the biggest concern I would have is sort of the diminished athleticism, and that is, very much understandable off of the years injury that he had to overcome. So I think that it's, something that is really unexpected, but at the same time, even when you fully recover from the injury in 1989, waiting for the fact that because of the deficits, his best really taken a step back as somebody who was one of the best 3D players in the NBA, obviously a little bit more off base, still made it all to the team in 2018 just before he ended with the first injury there. But last season, opposing offenses were 4.8 points per 100 possessions better with Klay Thompson on the court versus when the Warriors were without him. That differential was in the 14th percentile among wings last season, according to Cleaning Glass. The Warriors were also minus 4.5 points per 100 possessions in terms of net rating with him playing. And it's clear that he is not the same version of himself from a defending standpoint as he used to be. So there are going to be teams that, whether it is Pistons or Hornets or, along those lines, that would probably be willing to overpay a little bit, knowingly you get some maybe championship culture in the building, that you have a more reliable shooter, you get a veteran, etc., etc. But if he wants to be on a championship contending team, his options definitely lighten up to some degree. So we talked about the Warriors. I still feel that Steph Curry is playing at a level high enough that he could lead Warriors to a championship of some sorts, but he obviously needs more talent around him, and considering the financial situation of they were the most expensive payroll in the NBA last year already, of just under $207 million for the 2024 season, you're going to have Jonathan Kuminga coming up on a contract extension within the next couple years, decisions on other players as well, with a Brand Pajemski, Moses Moody, Trace Jackson Davis in the years, and you still have to deal with these contracts in Wiggins and Draymond Green, who are both making $24 million or more in each of the next seasons. And I'm not saying, who knows they're going to bounce back, so maybe it's kind of tough to ask at this point. And Draymond Green, he can say, well, hit, $1 is a lot, so he does by very short, but at the same time, brings to the table for the Warriors. He can be enough. If it's not be the Warriors, very limited options. Say he can decide they have a ton of cap space in order to build the roster. How much are willing to pay? There are a number of other. You want to just talk about the guy OG would pay way more to than Klay Thompson at this point in his career, and that's even said that OG has some injury concern behind him. The 76ers have a lot of moves that they're going to have to make this offseason. $30 million for Klay, it seems pretty unrealistic from that perspective. The Orlando Magic are a team that could very much use Klay Thompson, and if he's going to leave the Warriors, I feel like the Magic are probably one of the bigger targets, considering the fact it's a small market team. They have a lot of youth talent. They desperately need three-point shooting. So that's a pretty good fit in my eyes. We'll see about that. And the Oklahoma City Thunder as well are another team that could potentially be in the mix for him. Again, a lot of young players. That's where Klay's looking for a contract, 3+ years. I don't think the Thunder would be willing to do that. Now, maybe a 2-year contract with a team option in the third year, perhaps, but they are going to have all of these different players that they need to pay in the coming years as well. And I don't know if they can dish out sort of money in the long term like that. I don't know if anybody necessarily feels that they can. But let me know in the comment section what your expectations are for Klay Thompson moving forward. He is going to be a Hall of Fame player, and it sticks for as likable as he is. The fact that, just physically he has been so much more worn down over these past couple of years. I think Tatum, how much he's is a bit over in second. We will be moving on from the NBA right now, and we'll do a conference break here on the and the under the most pressure heavyweights. So we're diving in next with Steve Will back.
Type in GSMC content-rich podcast on health and wellness, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows. Available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are going to be moving into some NFL segments here. And I want to start off, there was actually an article that came out that really had me thinking. I saw earlier this morning, and I want to talk about the top coaches in the NFL that are under the most pressure headed into the 2024-25 season. I want to top 8. I also have a number. I think that's the template. I think that's the round. There's a really set compared to pressure. And one of the ones I just it was that the president was going to be article today, and I able to the that was Frank Thompson for the and he's able to in the market course of the Giants have some level of under him, but at the same time, I don't think that he's really on a hockey necessarily. There's somebody who was as we are working up a little bit here. But with Dable, oh boy, we're technical difficulties, so you will have to forgive me here. But I think that Dable, he was just a Coach of the Year candidate a couple years ago. He led the Giants to a playoff win for the first time in years, and did so with a quarterback Daniel Jones a lot of people had questioned about. But he was able to restructure the offense in a way that highlighted the run game in even more than we generally see nowadays in the NFL, and that was not to care the Giants throughout the season. Again, being able to Giants buzzed slow pressure and last year was terrible, and several times in specifically look at the Bills on time ball, there is a on them, but we're able to do so with Halos Anderson. The goal line had to end up coming away with 0 there. I don't think Dable should be considered somebody who has his job upper grabs here. I don't think that there's any real reason why NFL fans should have had more success over the past couple years than the Dable's been able to give them to. So I was definitely surprised seeing the possibility of being on Hot Seat, and I disagree. Number 7, I have Doug Peterson, another coach I think is relatively cool here. And Doug Peterson was praised a ton following the 2023 playoffs, where 2022 season into the 2023 playoffs, where they ended up coming back. And really, that whole season for Peterson was very vindicating for him. I thought he was a little bit unjustly fired for the Eagles all those years ago. He didn't hurt his rookie season. I thought he sort of fired for the sake of the Eagles were blatantly getting on national television, and they needed a way to scope. But that's sort of the point. For Doug Peterson, he was to this playoff despite a bad start regular season. Unless he'd be in position to make playoffs, actually have the top seed in the conference. And obviously, we talked about Baltimore to the Indies, that sort of sideline that they would have told you the Giants in the postseason. But ultimately. And they have some too. They'll probably not necessarily this massive contract in season. I'd say that if we were to NFL over years, NFL franchises which coincide correct possible over the coaches, and if everyone's to later on here, and the franchises are or the Jaguars franchise here, to hope that the issue isn't more they just gave $50 a year that it is coach. So I think he has a little proof to do for himself. Number 6, I have Sean McDermott. I was actually a little surprised at how low I am on this because it feels like the Bills should have at least made a Super Bowl by now with Josh Allen, and now they're going to be at least in perception. I don't think it's going to be this massive decrease from last season, but at the same time with McDermott, feels like the Bills should have more success. At the same time, they've had a lot of regular season success, and they've been prominent in the playoff a handful of years. But the majority of the time, they've lost Pat Mahomes and also Joe Burrow in 2001 as well, which is not, necessarily super defensible. But at the same time, you could be doing a lot worse for yourself. So McDermott, I think, at least has proved more than in his current situation is the word there. He's proven that he's looking this year. Number 5, I have the Chicago Bears. This is a situation where Brooklyn had a job around defense matter after last season, and now that Justin Henry did the design point of that, and there's just able to I believe the overall roster is significantly higher than it was last season. So even for the job this season, and there's no chance for another quarterback for this season. So it's going to be a big time for Jayson to speak about it. I have Pete is going to be reverse. I have him on this, especially even not handling expectations. The way everything got to and Russell was really, and I thought it was better before. So you hear all these rumors in the offseason of, Chucky was extremely in on Patrick Mahomes in the 2017 draft, would have taken him if possible, and now it's what he feels similarly to next. I think that's kind of garbage, but at the same time, but he has a lot of proof to do after a pretty disastrous couple years, or it's one season even, with Broncos, and they were still in playoff contention, considering the fact that they let up a new point in the game, they really weren't a good team. So again, Peyton's maybe too high on this list, but I just like for the notoriety of who he is and how ugly things got with Russell Wilson last year, he's got to be on the top of this list. Number 3, I have Nick Sirianni, of course, of the Philadelphia Eagles, somebody who just a year after taking the Eagles to the Super Bowl was being questioned by media in terms of should he be fired. Now, I'm never on board with that. But anytime you sort of do have that pressure, and overall, Eagles are a very good team and are playing a Hawks in the NFC, so should be good again, was a whole last season. But ultimately, Nick Sirianni, this is the every I don't necessarily feel this way. So I think that's a good fit in Philadelphia in way. We'll have to say. So I have like other two certainly all these first nights, and this is a big other team that everybody in national media is fixing on Indians always in. There's been a lot of those teams these years since they hopefully the minimum of the game was 10, but at this point, I just don't know whether or not Cowboys are going to be willing to hold on to him and face a situation of pressure from the national media. Especially if they don't win this season, Prescott ends up locking in free agency. What do you necessarily have on their build off of? I feel like the Cowboys probably don't want to face a little bit and then with sort of a new look into the following season. But number 1, I have Robert Saleh of the New York Jets. The Jets have been a disaster for a number of years now.